What's up with y'all boys? Welcome back to another video. Apparently, Moneybagg Yo is getting lawed or getting sued for $100 million. Crazy as fuck though. I ain't gonna lie, but I ain't gonna go ahead. I ain't gonna waste nobody's time. I'm trying to get rid of this tab bar. I ain't gonna waste nobody's time. We're gonna go ahead and get into it though.
Moneybagg Yo, one of the most consistent names in rap over the last several years. A Memphis artist who built his career from the ground up, turned mixtape momentum into mainstream dominance, and became one of the more commercially reliable figures in the game. His name carries weight. His catalog speaks for itself. And for a long time, the story around him was simple. Work hard, stay focused, win. But then a headline dropped that put his name in a completely different kind of conversation. Not about music, not about a tour or collaboration. This was about money, big money. The kind of number that makes people stop scrolling and read the full article. $100 million. That is the figure attached to a lawsuit that suddenly had people asking questions about Moneybagg Yo's past business dealings, his come-up era, and the relationships that were part of his foundation before the mainstream ever knew his name. Do you want to know how Moneybagg Yo has been moving while a $100 million legal case with his name on it has been sitting in a Tennessee courtroom? Do you want to know what the text messages entered into evidence actually say in his own words? Stay with us, because before we get to any of that, you need to understand the full picture, because if you think this is just about a lawsuit number, you are missing everything. Yo, what is good, fam? Welcome back. Let us get into it. Before we talk about the lawsuit, we have to talk about the artist, because you cannot understand the dispute without understanding the journey. And Moneybagg Yo's journey is one of the more grounded come-up stories in recent rap history. His name is Demario Dwayne White Jr., born in Memphis, Tennessee, raised in a city with a distinct musical culture and a street landscape that has produced some of the most authentic voices in hip-hop over the decades. Memphis is not a city that manufactures artists. Memphis is a city that forges them. And Moneybagg Yo came out of that environment with a style and a work ethic that was impossible to ignore. He started releasing music seriously in the early to mid 2010s. Mixtapes, street projects, independent grind, the kind of output that builds a regional fan base before the blogs start paying attention. He was not an overnight story. He was a slow build. Album after album, tape after tape, he kept stacking his catalog, while other artists from similar situations faded or stalled. Moneybagg Yo stayed consistent, and that consistency eventually started to get noticed outside of Memphis. Now here's the thing about that early period that most people scrolling past the headline completely missed. The early career phase is critical to this story because that is the phase where the business relationships that are now in dispute were allegedly formed. When an artist is coming up, before the major label deals and the mainstream visibility, the team around them often looks very different from the team that shows up on the other side of success. They are early managers, early investors, early believers who put in resources, time, and connections when no one else was paying attention. Some of those relationships have clean exits when things get bigger, and some of them do not. And when they do not, you get exactly the kind of situation we're about to break down right now. Now let us talk about Sherry Jackson Floyd. She is the central figure on the plaintiff side of this lawsuit, and the origin story of how she even connected with Moneybagg Yo is one of the details that most people covering this story glossed right over. Because Jackson Floyd was not someone from the music industry. She was not a talent scout or an entertainment executive. According to the lawsuit, she first met Moneybagg Yo while she was working at Bank of America, a bank. She was a banking professional, and her financial knowledge and business background were apparently what sparked the initial connection between them. Think about that for a second. The woman who is now suing for $100 million was not discovered in some management office or at a label showcase.
But she met him at the
She was sitting at a bank desk doing her job when this relationship started. That friendship eventually grew into something that went far beyond anything a typical banking relationship looks like. And that detail matters because it tells you something important about the nature of what was allegedly built between these two people. This was not a cold business arrangement between industry insiders. This was a personal relationship that crossed over into business, which is exactly the kind of situation where the absence of formal documentation creates the most damage down the line. According to the lawsuit, Jackson Floyd began working with Moneybagg Yo around 2015 to 2016. At that point in his career, he was still very much an emerging artist, We are talking about a performer earning somewhere between $1,525 per show. That is not touring money, that is not streaming money, that is early local circuit money. The kind of pay that tells you someone is working, putting in the reps, but has not broken through yet. And Jackson Floyd, according to the claims in the filing, stepped into that moment and made a decision to invest, not just financially, personally, and that combination is what makes this story more complicated than any headline can capture. But here's where it gets real. Do you want to know exactly what that investment allegedly looked like? Because the details that came out in this lawsuit are not vague. They are specific, and they are the kind of specific that makes this story hit completely different from how the headline presented it. According to the lawsuit, Jackson Floyd took on the roles of both personal and business manager for Moneybagg Yo. That means she was not just giving advice from the sidelines. She was handling day-to-day operations. She was registering trademarks. She filed the documents to legally establish Bread Gang Enterprises as a limited liability company in Tennessee. She was building the legal and business infrastructure of his brand from the ground up, the kind of work that most artists never have to think about because someone else is handling it. In this case, allegedly, that someone was Sherry Jackson Floyd. And then there is the money. Because the financial picture that comes out of this lawsuit is not abstract. The lawsuit claims that Jackson Floyd invested between $1.5 million and $2 million into the Moneybagg Yo brand. But it is the breakdown of how that money was allegedly spent that changes the whole story. She reportedly put $125,000 down on a Rolls Royce for him. She paid off credit cards linked to his name when he called and asked her to. She spent $50,000 on jewelry for him. She funded social media promotion to increase his digital presence and visibility. And according to the plaintiff's attorney, she also took care of several of his children during this period. He has reportedly 8 kids. That level of personal and financial involvement is not a standard management situation. That is a person who was deeply embedded in every dimension of someone's life, not just their career. And that is a distinction that matters enormously when you are trying to understand how a banking professional with no prior music industry background ended up spending close to $2 million on an artist's come-up. And by 2017, according to the lawsuit, that investment was showing results. Moneybagg Yo's annual earnings have reportedly grown to approximately $3 million. The lawsuit frames that growth as a direct product of Jackson Floyd's efforts and management. His most successful year to date at that point, even despite a run-in with the law and a fatal shooting at one of his concerts that could have derailed everything. Her attorney, Ralph Gibson, put it plainly. Obviously, he was the artist, but without her, he could not have gotten as big as he got. Whether that argument holds up in court is one thing, but the numbers being cited suggest that whatever was happening during that period was working. Now here is where the personal becomes legal, because all of this investment, all of this involvement, all of this management, according to the lawsuit, it was operating on what the amended complaint specifically describes as mere handshake agreements, not a formal management contract, not a signed document with defined terms, handshake agreements. Verbal understandings, promises made in conversation and in text messages rather than in binding legal paperwork. And that distinction is what this entire legal battle comes down to. Do you want to know what those promises allegedly were? Because this is where the lawsuit gets very specific. According to the claims, Moneybagg Yo promised Jackson Floyd weekly payments of $5,000. He promised her a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon valued at approximately $150,000. And he promised her 1/3 of all past and future brand revenue. 1/3. Not a standard management commission, not a percentage of touring income. 1/3 of everything the brand generated going forward. That is an enormous alleged commitment. And according to the lawsuit, not a single one of those promises was honored. Not the weekly payments, not the vehicle, not a cent of the revenue share. But here is the thing that makes this lawsuit impossible to simply dismiss as one person's word against another's. Because the attorneys for Jackson Floyd entered text messages into evidence, actual text messages that they are presenting as proof of what was allegedly promised. And one of those messages, according to multiple reports on the case, appears to show Moneybagg Yo writing to her directly. The message reportedly reads, "Starting next week, might give you $5K a week to at least show you. I'm not taking you for granted. Really appreciate you, Sherry. It'd be hard for me to show my feelings. Sometimes, G-Wagon comes soon, lol." That message, in his own words, is now part of a court record that is not a speculation, That is not a he said, she said situation where there is nothing
You
to
said that
point
shit
to.
out your
There is
own
a text
brain.
message in the
Like that.
court filing that the plaintiff's legal team is holding up.
I don't know what you did and had going, and the problem is can't keep updated is what they need perfect. Never fit me for what I do. The CPA is more than ready. I really can't read this shit. So Friday.
Up as evidence of exactly the kind of commitments they say were made and then abandoned. And when a jury reads that message, the question they are going to be asking is a very simple one. Does that read like a man who knew he had made a promise? Because if the answer is yes, that single text changes the entire
He
shape
grown
of
as
this
fuck.
case.
Yes, that's a promise.
And do you want to know what happened to Sherry Jackson Floyd personally as a result of all of this? Because the lawsuit does not just describe broken promises, it describes a specific chain of events that allegedly damaged her life in concrete ways. According to the complaint, Moneybagg Yo failed to make timely payments on the Rolls Royce that she put $125,000 down on. He also failed to make timely payments on other accounts that were linked to her credit cards. And because those accounts were in her name or tied to her credit, the late payments and defaults destroyed her credit score. And when her credit score was destroyed, she lost her job at the bank, the same bank where she had been working when she first met him. The career she had before the music industry entered her life was taken away from her, according to the lawsuit, as a direct result of financial obligations he failed to honor. That is the human cost underneath the $100 million headline. That is what this lawsuit is actually about on a personal level. A woman who walked into a music industry relationship from a stable career and allegedly walked out the other side with her credit destroyed, her job gone, and nothing to show for $2 million worth of investment.
And never
Now let
paid.
us talk about when this lawsuit was actually filed, because this is one of the details that almost nobody in the viral conversation about this story mentioned. This case was not filed last year. It was not filed when the headlines started circulating. This lawsuit was originally filed in 2019, and it was amended in 2022. This legal dispute has been sitting in the Tennessee court system for 7 years. 7 years of filings, delays, legal maneuvering, and back and forth while Moneybagg Yo's career continued to grow and his streaming numbers continued to climb and his tours continued to sell out. The reason this story exploded in the news cycle recently is not because the lawsuit is new. It is because the trial date was recently confirmed for October of this year in Shelby County, Tennessee. And something else happened that got people's attention. His lead attorney, a lawyer named Robert Spence, recently withdrew from the case right before a major trial. That kind of legal move this close to a court date raises questions that no one on the outside can fully answer. But it is a development that tells you this case is active, it is real, and things are moving. When a lead attorney exits a high-stakes case weeks before a scheduled trial, that is not a minor procedural footnote. That is a signal that something shifted inside the defense strategy. Whether that is about resources, disagreements on approach, or something else entirely is not yet public. But it is not nothing. The plaintiff's attorney, Ralph Gibson, actually addressed why the story suddenly went viral after sitting quietly for years. He said they just got the trial date confirmed, and that is probably why local news picked it up. Or it could be because Moneybagg Yo's lead counsel withdrew. He noted that they do not seek out the news, and he pointed out that he does not know why it was not picked up back in 2019 when the original filing happened. That is a telling detail. This case has been out in the open since 2019. It was not hidden, it was not sealed. It just did not generate attention until the combination of a confirmed trial date and a lawyer withdrawal put it back on the radar. Both parties are due back in court on July 16th, and the trial itself is scheduled for October. That means this situation is not in the rear view. It is directly ahead. Now let us talk about Roc Nation, because the presence of Jay-Z's company as a named defendant in this lawsuit is what takes this from a standard management dispute to something much larger. Roc Nation is not just any management company. It is one of the most visible and powerful brands in entertainment. It has represented some of the biggest names across music and sports. It is the kind of company that when its name appears in a lawsuit, the story immediately has a different weight attached to it. And that weight is not lost on anyone paying attention to this case. According to the lawsuit, Roc Nation became interested in Moneybagg Yo around 2018. And when they signed him, Jackson Floyd alleges they effectively brought him into their infrastructure without compensating her for the role she played in building the career they were now inheriting. She claims she was never reimbursed for the money she spent supporting his
mad
ride.
as hell.
And importantly, the lawsuit claims that text messages and evidence show that Moneybagg Yo himself informed Roc Nation of Jackson Floyd's involvement in at least the business management aspects of his brand before signing with them. That is the allegation. That Roc Nation was not unaware that they knew a prior management relationship existed, and that they moved forward anyway without honoring her financial stake in the brand or negotiating a buyout. Her attorney, Ralph Gibson, described the industry standard this way. He explained that what Roc Nation typically does is when they bring in artists, the standard practice is to compensate the local manager and producer who helped develop that artist. The argument being made is that they simply did not do that in this case. Neither Roc Nation nor Bread Gang Enterprises has publicly responded to the allegations. That silence on their end is also legally strategic, but it means that heading into October, the public only has one side of the factual picture. The defense will have its own version of events, and that version has not been presented yet. Now let us go back to the career trajectory, because the scale of what is being disputed only fully makes sense when you understand how dramatically Moneybagg Yo's commercial position grew after 2017. His mainstream breakthrough came in stages rather than through a single moment. The mixtape catalog he built in the early years established a base. Projects like Federal 3X, Too Heartless, and Heartless gave him street credibility and consistent regional pull. The collaboration with Young Dolph, another Memphis artist with massive influence, helped expand his visibility and connected him to a broader audience at a critical point in his trajectory. His signing with Interscope Records and the relationship with CMG, the collective music group label that Yo Gotti founded, gave him both major distribution and an independent label infrastructure at the same time. Time Served, released in 2020, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. For a Memphis rapper who had been putting in years of independent work, that debut number represents a complete validation of everything that came before it. It also changes the financial reality of an artist's career almost overnight. A Gangsta's Pain in 2021 followed at the same commercial level and produced Waukesha, which brought him mainstream radio exposure that added another dimension to his audience. By this point, Moneybagg Yo was a proven commercial force. His tour sold out. His features commanded real rates. His streaming numbers placed him among the most listened to artists in the genre. Now think about that growth in the context of the lawsuit. Jackson Floyd is not just asking for the value of what she put in between 2015 and 2018. She is asking for a constructive trust granting her 1/3 of revenues dating back to January 1st of 2017, plus a full accounting of every dollar the artist has earned since then. That is what the $100 million figure is built around. Not just the initial investment, the compounded value of what the brand generated after she was allegedly removed from it. That is how a management dispute from the come-up years becomes a 9-figure legal claim by the time it goes to trial. Now let us talk about something that the viral conversation around this story completely collapsed together. The difference between Moneybagg Yo's public silence and what people imagined his private reaction must have been. Do you want to know what Moneybagg Yo has actually said about this lawsuit publicly? Here is the answer. Nothing. Not a word, no statement, no social media post addressing the case directly, no interview comment, complete public silence on the matter. And while that silence became the canvas that the internet painted its own narrative on, memes, takes, imagined reactions, the reality of that silence is much simpler. When you are a named defendant in an active lawsuit heading toward an October trial, your legal team tells you to say nothing publicly. That is not mysterious. That is standard legal strategy. Anything said publicly can and will be used in the courtroom. So the silence is not hiding something dramatic. The silence is the lawyers doing their job. What is documented publicly is how Moneybagg Yo has continued to move while this case has been active. He showed up at the 2025 BET Awards. He has remained active professionally, He donated $20,000 to the Memphis Shelby County Schools Adolescent Parenting Program at Invictus Academy in January of 2025, photographed walking into the school for that donation. He has not retreated. He has not gone dark on social media. He has continued to operate as a public figure at the level his career demands while this legal situation works through the court system in the background. And that is actually its own kind of statement, even if it is not a verbal one. An artist facing a 9-figure lawsuit who keeps showing up, keeps releasing, keeps appearing publicly, that is either supreme confidence in his legal position or the kind of discipline that comes from having attorneys who know exactly what they are doing. And here's the question that actually matters when you look at all of that. Do you want to know what it says about someone that a $100 million lawsuit filed against them in 2019 somehow did not become a major public story until 2026? That is not an accident. That is what happens when something lives in court filings and legal dockets rather than press releases and social media. The case existed, the documents were public, but without a viral moment to pull it into the timeline, it just sat there. The trial date confirmation and the attorney withdrawal were that moment. Let us zoom out now and talk about what this story actually reveals about the music industry at a structural level. Because the details in this lawsuit are unusual in their specificity, but the pattern they represent is not unusual at all. When an artist is in their early development phase, the people around them are often taking on real risk. A manager who works with an artist before they are generating significant income is working largely on faith. They are spending time, making calls, building connections, and in some cases putting up personal capital to cover costs the artist cannot yet cover themselves. Recording sessions, travel, promotional materials, photography, video production, clothing. The costs of building an image and a brand are real, and someone has to cover them before the money starts coming in. This is where informal arrangements become the norm. In the early stages of a hip-hop career, formal contracts with clear commission structures and explicit duration clauses often feel out of place. Relationships are built on trust. Deals are made verbally. Commitments are understood rather than written, and that works fine until it does not. The legal system requires more than mutual belief that an agreement existed. It requires proof of terms, proof of consideration, and proof of a clear mutual understanding of obligations. When nothing was ever written down, proving those elements in court is a much harder task. And yet the text messages in this case represent exactly the kind of informal but documented evidence that can bridge that gap. The question is whether a jury in Shelby County finds them sufficient. The music industry is full of cases following this exact pattern. Someone invests heavily in an early phase. The artist makes it big. The compensation expectations of the early investor do not align with what the artist's current team believes is owed. A lawsuit gets filed years later, and then the court has to determine what actually existed as a binding obligation. It almost never goes cleanly for either party because the evidence is always incomplete and the memories always diverge. But what separates this case from many others in that category is the paper trail, the Rolls-Royce down payment, the credit card records, the job loss that can be traced back to specific payment failures, the text messages with specific dollar figures. These are not just allegations floating in the air. They are claims with documentation attached, and documentation changes everything in a courtroom. At the end of the day, this story is still developing. The legal process is ongoing. The outcome has not been determined. What we know is that the case is real, that it has been active since 2019, that it goes to trial this fall, and that it involves claims specific enough to have text messages, financial records, and documented damages as exhibits. The $100 million figure that made the headline is a claimed figure in a legal filing. It is not a judgment. It is not something that has been proven, but it represents a very specific calculation about what one person believes she is owed for the role she allegedly played in building a career that went on to generate those kinds of numbers. And depending on what a Shelby County jury decides this October, that number could end up meaning a lot more than a headline. And the silence from Moneybagg Yo, Rock Nation, and Bread Gang Enterprises is not a reaction. It is a legal posture. The reaction, the real one, will happen in the Shelby County courtroom in October. And that is the moment that will actually tell us something definitive about how this story ends. Before we close out, there is one more thing worth sitting with. Because beyond the legal arguments and the court dates and the $100 million number, This story raises a question that the music industry has never cleanly answered and probably never will. What do you actually owe the people who believed in you before anyone else did? Not legally, not contractually, but as a matter of character and integrity. The law can determine what an enforceable agreement requires. The law cannot determine what a person owes to someone who put their career, their credit, their financial stability, and years of their life into building something for you, when the outcome was far from guaranteed. That is a question that lives outside of any courtroom.
Yeah.
And it is a question that every
like-
artist who made it with someone else's help has to answer for themselves at some point. Sometimes that answer is handled quietly and privately, and sometimes it ends up on a court docket in Tennessee, scheduled for October with a $100 million price tag attached to it. Do you think Moneybagg Yo will address this publicly before the trial? Do you think Sherry Jackson Floyd has the evidence to back up what her attorneys are claiming in that courtroom? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And check out the content on screen for more deep dives into the stories that actually deserve your full attention.
Up.
Breaking news at 5 o'clock, Grammy-nominated music producer Tay Keith has
Yeah,
died.
where
Right
is
now,
my
Metro
mouse?
Police are
See, this is what I'm talking about. See? Anyways, y'all fucking with this video. Like and subscribe, of course.